Okay, so go ahead. He has a question.
Here we were actually just discussing
Okay, what's the question?
before we got here. A person's on a business trip in an isolated area where there aren't any kosher restaurants.
Okay.
Okay.
Can someone eat at a sushi restaurant that also serves like crab and all that stuff? And what's the definition of bishul?
So, what do you want to eat there? A glass of water, definitely.
Not cooked fish. Not cooked fish. Okay, like a tuna roll.
Right. So the issue is the main issue is really in the case of sushi is the rice.
How so?
Because the rice is cooked.
Okay.
So the rice could be an issue of bishul akum because it's cooked by a non-Jew and it's something which is considered, a respectable food.
Mm-hmm.
So the concern would be mainly about the rice. The fish itself, like eating the raw fish, if the knife that they cut it with is clean, there shouldn't be an issue with eating, like, let's say, raw salmon or something like that, because raw salmon is obviously kosher, and you could tell what it is.
Yeah.
But now the question is, what is the definition of bishul? Because if it's cooked by electricity, most of them are cooked by electric pots. So
Right.
Is it even bishul anymore? Because like when you have something cooked by the sun, is it really bishul or no?
Well, there are different definitions of bishul. There are different definitions of cooking depending on which area of halacha you're dealing with. So
The same across the board?
not necessarily. So when it comes to Shabbat, for example, cooking with the sun is not considered cooking, at least not min Torah, definitely not. And if you have, let's say, a frying pan that you heated in the sun and you cook with it, so it's asur mid'Rabbanan, essentially. It's rabbinically prohibited because you can't differentiate between a hot frying pan from the sun and a hot frying pan from fire. But in the case of bishul akum, so there are some who are also mekil, like Chacham Abba Shaul was lenient about electric stoves and things like that, and said that it's not really bishul. But most of the poskim don't seem to make that distinction when it comes to bishul akum, for example. Don't seem to differentiate. There are some who want to rely on that, where they want to combine other leniencies together with that. But there's no concern necessarily that they cooked anything in the rice pot other than rice. That I wouldn't be concerned about. Just like I'm not concerned if I go to a cafe that they cooked anything in the coffee pot other than coffee. But the question is who's doing the cooking.
And does it really matter if it's rice? So it's nothing you would see. It's not like chashuvi type of food. It's just.
I think it's pretty chashuv.
Like a lot of, it's like poor people have it also. It's very common. Like rice is.
So this is something where like
a lot of poor people in China.
it's not that right, but it's not that. See that's one of the things. So a lot of times they say, well, they say this to two extremes. They say, well, now poor people eat meat too sometimes. Poor people eat everything sometimes. And then some people will say, well, Bill Clinton used to eat McDonald's all the time, so that means McDonald's is Ole al Shulchan Melachim. Because he's very important. But that's not how it works. It means, is it something that would be served at a banquet? Okay? And definitely. I mean, just because poor people sometimes have it doesn't mean it wouldn't be served at a chashuv meal. You wouldn't serve French fries.
Right.
Okay? You wouldn't serve French fries. You wouldn't serve chicken nuggets. Okay? You would serve, although that's more complicated because it's chicken and whatever. But there's certain things you wouldn't serve in at a banquet. Would you serve rice? For sure, you would serve it. So that would come under Ole al Shulchan Melachim, especially if the king is Persian. And for sure.
Well, how about the seaweed? Would the seaweed be an issue?
The seaweed is just raw seaweed, and it's cleaned, and I don't think there's any concern about it that I know of. The main concern is the rice.
What if it's just reheated? Like it's like, from my understanding, the way that rice works is that it's cooked and then they dehydrate it and then you cook it again.
I don't know enough about how it's done.
But in a world where that's how it's done,
if it were commercially, cooked and taken out of a can or something like that, and they reheat it.
Considered bishul?
No, that wouldn't be. Right, that would not be. But I'm not sure that that's the case. Factually speaking, I'm not sure. I mean, basmati rice is not like that.
How
I don't
about the
know.
utensils that the restaurant uses? That's not a problem. They cut the knife.
So right,
kosher.
so that's why I'm saying I made some additional caveats and said if the knife is clean, the knife would have to be clean first of all, and you would have to be sure of that, and then you would have to be sure that obviously other things are not being the real. I would say there are two issues. The issue is a surfaces issue. The surfaces of the knives and the surface that they're cutting it on. Because they could just have cut crab and whatever right on the same surface. There's still residue from that, and now they're cutting your salmon. So it might.
Issue.
Right, so they should be really vigilant about that, but I'm not sure if you go to some hole in the wall in the middle of nowhere that they are.
What about in the hospital?
It depends.
What about in the hospital, in the order key, or in the thing?
In a hospital, in a plane.
Right.
In a plane, they're not going to serve sushi. So you don't have to worry.
Oh.
In a hospital.
Where they have to actually be vigilant.
Right, where they be vigilant. Still they're not going to serve sushi. There's no sushi.
Oh, the one you're talking
one thing that you can do is, let's say, for instance, you could. There are vegetarian options that can work. In a non-kosher environment that might be safer than going with something like seafood, only because seafood's being prepared with all kinds of other seafood that's not kosher. But. In theory, so the answer is in theory, yes. In theory, if the guy lets you turn on the rice pot,
if you hold that's enough.
Turning on the pot is enough. I think. Or putting the pot. I don't know how it works. Do they put it down on the stand? I'm not sure how it works.
Usually it's connected. It's it's a rice cooker, so it's just.
So you just flip on a switch anyway.
Yeah.
So then that's all you do. So that's all there is to do.
Because everything after that is passive.
It's automatic, right? So it's not like normally when we talk about Bishul Bet Yosef, you have to do something involved in the cooking, but there's nothing to do. So so you would just flip on the switch. That's what the non-Jewish guy is going to do. That's what you do.
Electric thing that you bake the what's it called? Eggs. The goy that's turning on, and when plug in, you plug out the thing. That's also the big problem.
Which thing?
Like you have in 54.
Oh, the
54 in the morning
thing that she cooks.
Yeah, and we have the question is if we there's I don't know I don't know if
I'm not so sure that those things are Oleh al Shulchan Melachim, but if they are, there's a lot of reasons to be mekil about that. First of all, because it's in a synagogue.
Electric.
Yeah. First of all, because it's under Jewish auspices. So there are many, like Chacham Ovadia, for example, is very lenient about let's say a Jewish-owned restaurant that has non-Jewish chef. It was more lenient because the whole takana was originally to prevent intermarriage. So it's not you're not going to marry the chef.
You're not really see the person.
And if you are going to marry the chef, it's not going to be because the chef in the back of the restaurant made you eggs. Right? So that's the so Chacham Ovadia says that if it's a Jewish-owned establishment, there's already a reason to be lenient. So if a Jew turns on the fire, it would be enough.
But I see it in 54. I see the Goya that she's putting the what?
Yeah, she puts her eggs on, but I don't know who turned on the thing. Maybe a Jewish person turned on the thing. I assume.
It's a big problem if she plug it in and put the eggs on it.
I think it would probably be better that a Jew turns on the fire. Yeah.
It's not a fire.
Turns on the machine. The machine.
No,
the griddle. Right.
The electric thing. Okay.
Yeah.
Is that's also considered bishul also?
According to most people, it's considered bishul. I would think it is. I think that there's no difference.
I have a follow-up question, if I may. A certain rabbi sent out an email regarding women learning Mishnayot or something.
Yeah. He was just mentioning that.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
That's funny.
Okay.
What are your thoughts on that?
About women learning Mishnayot?
Torah in general.
I'll avoid that men learned Mishnayot.
True.
Our Moshe Feizen has a tshuva on it.
So the issue is like
looked
this.
it up already.
There's a very simple answer.
Our Moshe Feizen says permitted. He says mutar.
I don't think that's actually what he said, but
And even if that is the case, why?
Logic behind which thing?
He's quoting Rav Moshe allegedly, so let's assume that he did.
I don't recall that he actually says that, but we have Igrot Moshe here. But I would say I think the answer is pretty straightforward. I mean, there's no way that it's possible that it's asur for a woman to learn.
Yeah, the Rambam.
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Because the Gemara talks about Beruria learning halachot from all the different rabbis in the times of the Talmud, times of the Mishnah. So she was learning all these halachot. There's even a Tosefta, Masechet Kelim, where there's a machloket between the Chachamim, and the rabbis say the halacha is like Beruria against the other rabbis.
Yeah.
So there's definitely, in a time where Torah Sheba'al Peh was actually oral Torah, there was no way for a woman to learn Torah Sheba'al Peh without having somebody teach it to her. It was impossible because it was oral. It was orally transmitted. So obviously the Chachamim must have been giving her this information, must have been teaching it to her. It said that she went from rabbi to rabbi every day and learned hundreds of halachot from different rabbis all the time. So obviously they were giving her the knowledge that she sought. The same is true of, it says about Huldah, the Nevi'ah, Huldah in Sefer Melachim, that she was sitting B'Mishnet, so she was sitting, and the Targum says she was learning Torah Sheba'al Peh in the Beit Midrash. All of these, anybody who's whether it be Huldah or it's any other one of the Nevi'ot, Devorah, obviously, if Devorah is judging the Jewish people, she's obviously judging them based on the Torah. Where did she learn the Torah from? She must have received the Torah Sheba'al Peh, because the Torah Sheba'al Peh wasn't written down, so she couldn't have snuck in somewhere and read the Torah Sheba'al Peh.
Well, that's already different because you make the claim that there was no enactment, there was no formal tekana against women learning Torah at that time.
Right. Well, if you read the Rambam very carefully, he's very clear in saying, bring me the source of Rav Moshe, because I don't think that's
Rav Moshe permitted to the Beit Yaakov's school assistant to teach
the Pirkei Avot only. Pirkei Avot only. Right. That's different. Pirkei Avot is not. Yeah, they distinguish. That's what he said. That's why I'm saying he didn't say
part
that.
of Mishnah also.
It is, but it's considered like an ethical work. Yeah. So look at the Rambam's language very carefully. To take somebody who's listen to what he says.
Look it up in
okay.
I bring them.
So this is what he says. He says, "Isha shelameda Torah yesh la sachar." A woman who learns Torah, she has reward for that. But it's not like the reward of a man, because she's not commanded. Okay, but then it says, "Tzivu chacham v'afal pi shesh la sachar, tzivu chachamim shelo yelamed adam et pitot Torah." Okay, so who is the takana on?
Men.
It's on the man not to teach his daughter Torah. Mipnei sherov hanashim ein datan mechuvenet lidlamed, because most women, their minds are not, are not inclined to learn. So what the takana was that there shouldn't be compulsory education for women.
Whereas by men,
okay, right. Whereas for boys, you have to make them do it. For girls, you don't have to make them do it. But it's not a sort to teach if she wants to learn.
Doesn't the Chafetz Chaim say women are obligated to learn what applies to them?
For sure. Well, that's not even a question. For sure. Anything that applies to them, like the halachot that apply to them or anything, they must learn, absolutely. So the only question is, do they have to learn for its own sake? Like learn Tanakh, or even learn Tanakh, or even learn any area of Mishnah or Gemara that, they could just ask for the practical conclusions. They don't have to learn, let's say, the Mishnah or the Gemara to get to the conclusion. So basically, what the way the Rambam expresses it, and there are other poskim that are medayik this, in this language. I think that Aruch HaShulchan also brings this, that the halacha is telling you that you shouldn't have a compulsory system where women are forced to learn, because not all women are going to be interested in learning Tanakh and Mishnah and Gemara in that way. And since they're not obligated, you shouldn't force them, right? But whereas boys, they're obligated, so you have to do it, even if they don't have a natural inclination. You have to put them through some kind of compulsory education. But if a woman wants to learn, we see from Beruria, we see from Tanakh, we see from many examples of women who are very knowledgeable. Even the famous Shemuel ben Ali, who was the opponent of Harambam. His daughter, when he died, his daughter took over the yeshiva. his daughter took over the yeshiva and taught. So you see that she obviously learned from her father something.
Had to be from
Yeah. I mean, right. So there's a story. Well, he was the only person to learn from it. For sure, he taught her, so she must have been interested. So he taught her. So where else would she get the knowledge from? And there's a lot of stories. Even the Chacham Ovadia brings a story. I think it's from the Ben Ish Chai originally. A story about a woman who used to sit outside the room when her father would learn and learned so much from just not. So it's not quoted critically. It's quoted as she's brilliant. Yeah, so he says, Pirkei Avot, I remember this Teshuvah. He says, are you allowed to teach a Mishnayot? And he says, you should stop Virak Pirkei Avot. So he's saying Virak Pirkei Avot. Mishum Shu Inyanei Musar, V'Hanagot Tovot. Only because it's ethics.
There's a rumor it's going out there, they're teaching the woman, girls, Gemara Brachot. Only Gemara Brachot. That's because, is that possibility they're teaching them?
They don't think that Gemara Brachot is part of the Talmud? I don't know. I think the halacha is...
Have you heard that before?
No, never. I think that the halacha is that you can't force girls to learn. That's what the Rambam is saying. You can't force them. It's not saying if they want to, that they shouldn't be allowed to. It's saying it doesn't say it's asur for the woman to learn. It specifically says the father shouldn't impose upon his daughter to learn if she doesn't want to.
Okay, what about wearing tefillin? A woman, Rambam said they're halachi, they're allowed to wear tefillin.
What does that have to do with this? This has nothing to do with this. That's a totally different halachot, totally different parameters. That's a totally different area.
A different area? Okay.
Yeah. Learning Torah is a different story. There was no issue with women putting on tefillin according to the Rambam, but that doesn't mean that they have to or shouldn't. He doesn't say anything about it. He just says that they're exempt.
Or is it because of the women they're more highest?
Whatever the philosophical.
Is it because
reason?
of kedusha? Because we're there like highest and they're out there.
That's a good way. That's a positive way of looking at it. It could be. I mean, there's a lot of possibilities for why women are exempt from certain mitzvot. I think the simplistic, practical reason was that time-bound mitzvot are very difficult for women to keep because they have the responsibilities of children. And I think that's the most obvious reason. And anybody who's married and has children realizes that that's obvious. Right? It becomes obvious to you when you have children that it would be impossible for you and your wife both to go to minyan.
What about
because what are they going to do?
What about going to shiurim? There's rabbis that go into men or women go to shiurim. That's like they're allowed to learn something from.
If they go to the shiur, they're allowed to go. Why not? There's nothing that says they can't learn. It only says that they can't be forced to be. They can't have compulsory education in Torah Shebaal Peh. That's all that it says. So that doesn't mean that they can't. If a girl says, I want to learn Mishnah, I want to learn Gemara, I'm going to go to the shiur and I'm going to listen, you don't throw them out. They want to learn. Let them learn anything that they want. That's the real.
Same thing for Torah Shebechtav.
Torah Shebechtav, basically, what happened was, the Rambam says, really, Torah Shebechtav, you could. He says that, he says, ideally, you shouldn't force her to learn that either, but if you do, it's not going to hurt. Okay? In other words, basically, he's saying, lilamedota. That means to teach her. In other words, to impose upon her a regimen of learning. Nowadays, they say the opposite, that it would be damaging to girls if they don't receive that education, because what's going to happen to them in our society, they're receiving all kinds of other influences. It's not like they live in the shtetl where they're only going to hear divrei Torah and kedusha. They're going to be filled with shtuyot. So if they don't teach, they have to teach something, content to the girls. But if they wanted to learn something beyond the content that's of the minimal necessity for them, then they're allowed to learn anything that they want, and they should be, the doors should be open to them to learn, for sure. So that's what the Rambam seems to say, and that's what I would answer to that. That seems to be the simple meaning of what the Rambam is saying, and it's very difficult to believe that it's asur for them to learn when we find all of these women who are chachamot in the past. Because how did they learn it? Be'isur, it was mitzvah haba ba'avera. How did they come to know the Torah? It must have been through a sin that they learned the Torah. It couldn't be. So that's the That is the basic answer to that. And if they become very great in limud Torah, that's wonderful. But they don't have to be pressured to do it because it's not obligatory. Okay? Boys, you have to push that a little more.
All right. What about speaking about it's coming up? It's going to be Shemitah. Now, when in Israel there is a problem, we can't. Actually, we said you're not allowed to sell it to a goy because of first is of the zara, and secondly, we cannot sell it to Arabs right now. There's a big issue with the situation right now. Is there any way we could get out of it? Because first of all, we cannot give it to a goy. We cannot sell it to a goy.
Are you asking or telling me the answer?
I'm not asking a question.
Okay.
I'm trying to know how we get out of it.
The original Heter Mechira for Shemitah was started by the chief rabbis of Israel a long, long time ago. And it's a loophole. It's like Mechirat Chametz. I mean, it's the same kind of loophole where they wanted to allow people to not violate. Basically, they couldn't fulfill the mitzvah. They felt that it wouldn't be possible, wouldn't be realistic for the farmers to fulfill the mitzvah in the proper way. So they instead, would you like to come?
Sorry, he's just.
Or are you looking for something?
Josh Levion?
He's inside there.
Thank you.
In the early days of the state of Israel, and subsequently, there was a concern that it wasn't realistic for the farmers to observe Shemitah in its ideal, in its ideal form. So Mechirat, the Heter Mechira came. They allowed them to sell to an Arab in order to avoid the problem of working the land in the times of Shemitah. But and when there was a lot of opposition to that from the growing Haredi force, that they didn't want to sell the land to a non-Jew. Actually Chacham Ovadia used to do the Heter Mechira in his house. He used to actually do the Mechira in his house when there was opposition to it because he really stood by it. He stood by it. He said, listen, it's a legitimate heter. We would rather them do this than violate the Isur of Shemitah. And in any case, Shemitah is only midirabanan nowadays. It's only midirabanan bezman hazeh, which is why the heter mechira came to begin with, because the majority of the Jewish people don't live in Israel. And so, which is unfortunate, but a fact. And therefore, it's only derabanan. And so, if we're allowed to use, let's say, creative loopholes and strategies to get around rabbinic halachot, so it's getting around the rabbinic halachot.
So the Torah said you're not allowed to sell or give.
Where does it say that in the Torah?
In the Torah, you're not allowed to give a land.
I never saw that. You're not allowed to let them live in the land. You mean? And that's talking about idolatry.
Really granting a goy anything.
Right. That's true. Well, you're right, but you're not. You're selling it to him. That's lo techonim is matnat chinam.
True.
Right. You're not supposed to give them a free gift for no reason.
Right.
But you're not doing it for no reason. You're doing it to avoid violating Shemitah, and also you're getting money.
You do you give it selling.
Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to sell chametz either, because lo techonim doesn't just apply in the land of Israel. That applies to anything.
No, and then you could take anything you want from the crops. So you could take anything. Any Arab could come take it, and he could go home with.
That's the way it works. I mean, if you sold it, you sold it.
Because they're buying it.
When people sell their chametz and the guy knocks on the door and says, "Hi, I want to take my food that you sold me," you have to let him in.
Oh, then you own it.
No,
you
have to let him have it.
You have to let him have it.
If he wants your cognac, you can't stop it. You gotta let him have it.
If you sell the chametz to this non-Jew,
how long did he does have to have the whole thing?
If he comes on Pesach and you sold him the chametz,
talking about the Shemitah time.
During the whole year.
During the whole year.
Well, the season, I guess, yeah.
That's not good.
But I've never heard of it being a problem.
There's a big problem.
I'm saying I've never heard of them coming and taking the food. I don't think that they do.
Arabs will. They're gonna destroy everything.
I'm sure they're very careful with who they select. Yeah.
They already did the Gush Katif. They brought up the whole thing.
Yeah, they don't necessarily. They might give it to a Christian Arab or something. I don't know how they do it.
Oh, Christian Arab.
The Bedouins, yeah, Bedouins. Maybe Bedouins. Yeah, you're right. The Bedouins, the Druze are not.
They're not.
Huh?
Right, but they would take land.
What? You're not gonna give going Christians or
No, maybe not. Maybe they're right. Maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
That's a big problem.
Right.
True or not?
You're right. But I don't know who they sell it to. I'm not sure how they do it. Fortunately, I'm not part of the Rabbanut of Israel, so I don't have to worry about that. I mean, I don't know. Logistically, I don't know how it works. What I'm saying is the fact that it's only an Isur D'Rabbanan, and because it's an Isur D'Rabbanan, they're allowed to come up with loopholes. It's a loophole.
Yeah, but there's so many stuff. The fruits are coming from Israel. They bring it over
Yeah,
here.
but the courts over there take care of it. That's what he's trying to say.
I'm saying the courts over there are
Work out in Israel.
work it out.
You're fine. Don't worry about it. You can sleep.
Also, another thing we were discussing on the way here was regarding entering churches.
Okay.
This question comes up very often for students that want to take tests, particularly the SATs. Many times they're in churches and public Christian centers, if you will.
Right.
So yeah, so I mean, the question is, are you allowed to enter at all times if it's a particular denomination of Christianity which doesn't acknowledge the Trinity or whatever it is, or are you allowed to enter at all times if it's not during worship time? How does it work exactly?
Well, basically, you could, if you can't go into the sanctuary. Okay, that's for sure. But if they have, let's say, like a building, that's like some kind of
Like a social.
social building, you're allowed to go to the social hall. You just can't go into the actual place of worship, which they would never have the test in there.
Regardless of denomination of Christianity.
They're never going to let you have the test inside their actual sanctuary of the
Well,
church.
assume you want to appreciate the architecture. I don't know.
No, yeah, you can't do that. I mean, if you're asking for exact theological thing, like for example, Jehovah's Witnesses are monotheists.
Really?
Yes. Mormons are polytheists. Actually, they're actually not even considered monotheists by Christians because they actually believe in 3 separate gods.
Oh wow.
They're actually classified as polytheists because even according to the view that the Trinity is monotheism, which we don't accept, right? But even if you accepted that, the Mormons actually believe there are 3 separate persons. There is, the Father, the Son, and the 3 different beings.
Different entities. No?
Yeah, different entities. They're not merged. They work together, but they're not one. So they're actually polytheists. Jehovah's Witnesses actually are monotheists. They don't believe in the Trinity.
At all.
No. So it does depend on the denomination to some extent, but I mean your typical Christian that you're going to encounter, Catholic or Protestant or Episcopalian or any denomination of Protestantism or anything in communion with the Catholic Church or the Greek Orthodox Church, they're all going to be the same problem of Avodah Zarah from a halachic perspective. But you can go into their social hall.
But the argument that many make is,
for example, let's say you needed to go to a wedding. Some non-Jewish person invites you to a wedding, so you can't go into the sanctuary for the actual mass if you're talking about a Catholic wedding. But you could go to the party. You can't. There's nothing wrong with 2 Catholic people marrying each other. It's better that they not marry one of us than when you go to for a funeral. You can't go for the funeral mass, but you can go to the wake. There's nothing wrong with going to the wake. Not a Kohen, but
No, you're allowed to. Kohen is.
you have to stay away from the actual body. The actual body is there.
Yeah, Kohen is allowed. He could go under the.
No, I know you can go under the ohel, right? But you can't touch. You can't touch.
You're not touch.
Right.
Yeah, well, the Jewish man.
Then you can't go in the room. Right.
The argument that some make, though, is that the Gemara only prohibits entering a home where Avodah Zarah, a physical object of foreign worship, is present.
Right.
Over there, where everything is conceptual, because the Trinity is a conceptual concept.
So
they have Jesus.
Yeah.
They have actual statues all over the place. The Catholics.
They have Jesus.
I know they do, but
This is basically So Protestants. Wait. Too many. I'm losing the conversation.
Part of like the artistic.
So it depends. I mean, they have
Some of them have stuff.
some of them. See, one of the big differences. We're going to get into like a whole theological history of Christianity here, but one of the big differences between Catholicism and the churches in communion with the Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox versus the Protestants was the issue of icons, right? So Protestants generally don't have statues and they don't do saint worship, whereas the Catholics and people they believe in saint worship, and so they have statues all over the place. If you walk by St. Patrick's Cathedral in the city, you'll see them even outside. I mean, they've got the statues and all kinds of things, and they do bow to those statues. Now you'll say, well, they don't believe that statue is actually the saint. They believe that they're communicating, but neither does the Oved Avodah Zarah believe that. I mean, the Baal worshiper who has a statue of Baal doesn't think that's Baal, the actual Baal, because he knows that his friend has another Baal statue in his house. So they realize that that's not actually the living Baal. That is the channel through which Baal energy, is mediated or something like that. I don't know what their exact Baal theology is, but the Ibn Ezra talks about that in Sefer Yeshayahu. How could they be so stupid that because Yeshayahu asks, says, you used half of the log to cook your meal, and then you use half of it, and you bow down and say, "You're my God, save me." How could they be so foolish? So he says the reason why they're so foolish is because they're not that stupid. They don't actually believe that the log is the God. They know that they just made it. They just think that just like the Jews believed that the egel comes into it. Exactly. So not lahavdil. Actually, it's the same thing. What happens in a Catholic church during with transubstantiation? Transubstantiation. You didn't learn Catholic theology. Okay. So what happens? What happens in according to Catholic theology is that when you consecrate, you know that they take the wafer and the wine.
Yeah.
So when you consecrate the wafer and the wine, the belief is that transubstantiation means that the wafer and wine actually become the blood and the body, the body and the blood of the Savior. So it's not as if. Okay, in Catholic, the big machloket between the Catholic and one of the big machlokot between the Catholic and the Protestant churches is it literal or metaphoric? So the Protestants believe that it's only metaphoric. The Catholics actually believe that it's literal. So if you've ever watched, not that you should, I don't recommend it, but if you've ever happened to see, a Catholic Mass, you will see that after they consecrate the host, they actually get down on the ground and bow down to the wafer and to the wine. They believe and they consider it a grave offense to desecrate the host once it's been consecrated. So there was a kid at my old synagogue that he used to say the Aleinu L'Shabeach, and he used to say Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel Urakik by accident, right? Rakik is a wafer, and I said you're making a reference to Shehem Mishtachavim LeRakik. It's exactly what they do. They bow to a wafer. So it's silly to us, but that's what they do. So the same idea that somehow the Baal that they make with the wood becomes the God through some transubstantiation process. So it's not that. So they do very truly believe that wafer is. If you've ever seen that parade around with the host in the streets, like with a cracker, and everyone's bowing to the cracker.
There's a pasuk in Aleinu we just say the name.
It's a very unusual. It's a very straight. We say Shehem Mishtachavim Lehevel Varik.
Oh, in Aleinu.
Varik, yeah. But Varik means nothing.
We say LL. You bow down. We say
LL Lo Yoshia, and then you stop. Right. So this idea is. What all avodas are. So once you start saying, it's like a Christian will say, of course, worshiping a man would be idolatry if he wasn't really God.
He wasn't really God.
Right? Yeah. But the only problem with that logic is every idolater thinks that their idol is God. So in la davar sof. So then there can't be a definition of idolatry, because of course if I'm worshiping this tree, I think it's God. So it would be idolatry to worship this tree if it weren't God. It just happens to be that it is. So by that logic, you can worship anything.
Worship is generally addressed to God.
To some kind of thing that you believe has divine power. Yeah. So if I didn't believe it had divine power, I wouldn't be worshiping it. But that's the definition of avodah zarah. Is attributing divine power to a created object. That's what the Rambam says. One of the Nivra'im.
The cross is not really over the Zarah.
The cross is different. The cross is different. But Chacham Ovadia is very interesting because he has two teshuvot. He has a teshuvah to a convert, okay, who wanted to know, can they say Kaddish for their parent that died? And then he has a teshuvah on worshiping or entering a church. Okay? And it's very interesting. I actually gave a shiur on this on YouTube. You can find it.
Really?
Interesting shiur that we went through these two teshuvot. We were doing I was doing a memorial series of shiurim on interesting teshuvot from Chacham Ovadia. And so I compared these two teshuvot. And what's remarkable...
Are you talking adoption?
No. He was born, he converted.
Oh.
I get. So what happened is that Chacham Ovadia says, when he's addressing the ger, he goes through a long pilpul in the beginning that, well, maybe Christianity, maybe it's not Avodah Zarah, there's a lot of mitigating factors, maybe he didn't really believe in it, maybe we hold like the opinion that it's not, maybe, he brings a couple pages worth of trying to be Milamed Zechut, and then he says, and even if it is, still, who's to say that, he gives a whole bunch of things. In the end he says, yeah, of course he can say Kaddish, it's no problem, he can say Misha Berach for a non-Jewish relative, you can do all those things, okay? But it's a very fascinating teshuvah, because he goes through all these mitigating factors about, in relation to a non-Jew. But then, when in the teshuvah, where he deals with going into a church, he says, absolutely not, it's Avodah Zarah, there's no question.
What about?
Right? So what's the difference? So what's the difference?
How there's a synagogue in Los Angeles that became it used to be a church, a Persian synagogue.
Yeah, now it's a Persian synagogue. It's the biggest. That's allowed?
That's for sure allowed. You're allowed to change a church into a synagogue.
You should be.
That's fine.
I think it's
Very biblical.
But
La'akor Avodah
it's
Zarah.
not there.
You're taking away.
It's like
Of course,
It's not. It's a church. What do you call it?
the architecture.
Like everything's
Fine, so-
architect, but obviously there's no
That's
church.
good. I mean, that's fine. La'akor Avodah Zarah. There's the movement B'nai Noach, the B'nai Noach movement down south. One of the things that they did that was very controversial was that they cut the steeple off of the church and said, we don't believe in Jesus, we believe in Hashem. We reject. This guy's name is J. David Davis. So he's in Athens, Tennessee. Started studying the Bible. Starts realizing, our religion doesn't make any sense with the original Tanakh. What's going on here? Starts searching. Starts learning with rabbis. Realizes, we have all this paganism that's infiltrated our religion, and he starts trying to root out the paganism. Cuts the steeple off the church. Gets rid of the crosses. Decides to become B'nai Noach. He went on Larry King.
Really?
And he gets death threats from all these pastors. They said, you're a cult, you're this, you're that. And he got connected to a bunch of rabbis, and the rabbis, helped them and gave them all kinds of instruction. And this is how the B'nai Noach in America, there's a Noachide movement. And that's how it started. And they converted their churches into B'nai Noach places of worship of Hashem. That's great. Why not? Kain Yerbu. What's wrong with it? That's exactly what. If you look at what the Christians did, the Christians basically went and they took places of pagan worship and turned them into shrines. A mosque is not considered avodah zarah.
Probably
not. Really?
Definitely not. Yeah, no. I mean, there's no reason to think that mosques are avodah zarah. They don't worship. They don't worship a physical object or idol. They worship one God.
Is there a group of just like the civil ones?
There's Hana.
You're not supposed to benefit from or even say how beautiful a church is because it's a type of. First of all, it's benefiting from the idolatry, and second of all, because it's praising and giving shevach to idolatry indirectly, because you're praising, you're giving kavod basically by going and honoring the beautiful architecture, basically giving kavod to their religion, which is indirectly to avodah zarah. So it is a problem. Plus the benefit, in addition to the benefit.
How about if it turned into like a museum? A church turned into like a museum.
If it's completely no longer used for worship at all anymore, I think they still use it, don't they? Yeah. I mean, like St. Patrick's Cathedral, you could walk through it. They have it open all the time. During the prayer services, they have a thing on the outside that says, prayers, service in session. But otherwise, you could walk through it and admire the architecture. But it's still a house of worship. And of course, why did they make such? Just think about it. Why did they make such a beautiful house of worship? Of course, when you go in, you look and say, "This is nice architecture," but I'm not going to start believing in this stuff. But the whole idea is that somebody walks in and they're so captivated and enthralled by the beauty of it that they're drawn to the religion. That's why that's the danger of the allure of avodah zarah.
And temples all over.
And that's the reason why we are supposed to beautify mitzvot. Also, we beautify mitzvot. So
what about what's going on in Washington D.C. after the war, World War I and World War II? The cemetery they mixed with the Jews and the Christians.
I don't know. What? Oh, you mean like the military cemetery?
Yeah, military. What is there a big question about it?
I never heard any discussion about it. Obviously, it would be better for the Jews to be buried in their own cemetery.
Why did they do bury
At the
with
time, I don't know. I wasn't around during World War II.
No, and you today, you see there were the crosses and the Magen David there you see.
Yeah, I know, because the military buried them. I don't know. Apparently,
You're talking in a multi-purpose religious room.
No, he's asking about cemeteries that are mixed. It's better to have Jews separate, obviously, for sure.
And can you go to say Kaddish right over there when they say
it doesn't matter. I mean, a cemetery is not a place of worship, okay? So, like the Ralbag explains, why do we bury Jews and non-Jews in separate cemeteries? What difference does it make? It's a burial. What's the difference?
They have a picture. They have a statue of the angels and the Jesus on the all over.
They don't have Jesus on the grave, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. What I'm saying is, but let's say they didn't. Okay, so still, why do we bury Jews and non-Jews separately? What's the reason? So the Ralbag says because we want to show that just like Jews are distinct in life, they're also distinct in Olam Haba.
It's a new thing.
Kol Yisrael Hashem Chelek Olam Haba. Right? Yeah. We want to show that they're distinct from the non-Jews even after death. Okay, so then ideally we should put, but a cemetery in essence is not a place of worship. A cemetery is essentially a place of memorial for people who died. So there's nothing per se wrong with going to a non-Jewish cemetery. You can go to a burial of a non-Jewish person in a non-Jewish cemetery. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not considered a place of worship.
Doesn't the Gemara
It even gives one opinion.
Yeah.
It's a machloket in the Gemara whether on Ta'aniyot you could go to a non-Jewish cemetery, because the machloket is, do you go to the cemetery because of the zechut of the people who died, in which case you would go only to a Jewish cemetery, or is it to remind you of the day of death, in which case it doesn't matter. Death is death. Jewish, you remind you of that. So yeah, but there's clearly no prohibition on going to a non-Jewish cemetery. It's pashut, davar pashut. It's not considered a place of worship. And even the fact that we do, and this is an aside, and I'm not saying halacha le'maseh. I'm just saying that even the fact that we go and we read prayers in the cemetery is problematic halachically. Yes. Because really, you're not supposed to pray within 4 amot of a kever. You're not supposed to say psukim. You're not supposed to learn Torah close to a grave. The custom today is we consider it kevod hamit to do it. We consider it an honor to the person who died to do that. But that itself is not the original law on the books. Just like, this is another step removed from the original topic, but in areas of death and mourning, contemporary normative halacha has strayed very far from original halacha. Original halacha is almost the opposite in many ways of contemporary practice when it comes to mourning. For instance, it says explicitly in the Gemara Moed Katan, you can't ein omrim shmu'a bebet avel. You're not allowed to say over Divrei Torah in the house of Shiva. In the Avel's house, you're not allowed to say Divrei Torah. Nowadays, it's you have to. Somebody has to say Divrei Torah so we can take Kaddish. Okay? In the Shulchan Aruch it says, an Avel is asur to be the Shaliach Tzibur. He's not allowed to be. Now, they try to get the...
Not in the first 7 days.
Yeah, that's Avel B'toch Shiva.
Right. Right, but
already in Shloshim.
the Ashkenazim do it even during the Shiva. They have them, and some Sfaradim also.
Also, if it's on Shabbat,
it's better if they don't. If that's the minhag, if they don't, that's better.
The Shadis, I think the first 7 days.
They don't, so that's the right thing. So that's the right thing. No, that's fine. But I'm saying in the Jewish world in general, they tell the Avel to lead even during the Shiva. It's against the Shulchan Aruch. What's the reason? I'll tell you why. Because here's an interesting thing. What happened was that the Kabbalah. Okay, the original idea of Avelut was focused on the Avelim. Okay, the original idea of the Avelut, of mourning, was focused on the mourners and their working through their loss, working through the tragedy, and not learning Torah, not leading prayers, not doing any communal responsibilities, and so on. What happened because of Kabbalah was that the focus shifted to Ilui Nishama. Okay? Ilui Nishama of the Niftar. This comes from the Kabbalah of the Arizal. This comes from Lurianic Kabbalah. This doesn't exist in the Gemara. The idea that studying Torah in the memory of the Niftar is going to elevate the soul of the Niftar. So because everything switched around, now all of a sudden, instead of it being asur to learn Torah in the house of the Avel, Shmu'a va'agada, Shmu'a va'agada b'vet Avel. No, you have to do it because it's le'ilui nishmato. You have to say that the Avel should lead the prayers because it's le'ilui nishmato. We should have food on the day of the Yartzeit. it used to be that the person would fast on the day of the yahrzeit of their parents. Now, among many Sfaradim especially, they eat a lot. And then they say brachot, and they say, when you say the brachot, it's le'ilui nishmat, the person. It used to be, no, you fast on that day so that the Avel will do teshuvah. They remember the loss of their parents and they do teshuvah. Right? So it all switched. It switched from a focus on the living, right? From a focus on the living, which was the original intent of those halachot, to a Kabbalistic focus on elevating the soul, and that reversed a lot of the original halachot and a lot of the original minhagim. It's very interesting.
The question?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yes, she's been waiting a long time. I feel bad. Yes.
Do you personally believe in reincarnation?
Me personally, my personal beliefs are not, necessarily the topic of the discussion. I mean, there are.
You say both sides on.
I would say that there are. My personal belief is that there are different opinions in Jewish tradition on this issue. What?
So give the Gaonic one.
Right. So, obviously the very well known as Saadia Gaon and the Rambam obviously didn't believe in it. Most Rishonim
didn't?
No. Most Rishonim did not believe in it. The Ramban, in my opinion, Nachmanides did. I know some people try to pull, they try to use what we call casuistries to exempt him of the accusation that he believed in Gilgul, but it seems clear to me that he did, and that the Kabbalistic tradition, even pre-Zohar, which the Ramban had, the Kabbalistic tradition pre-Zohar, did believe in it. It seems very clear to me in a reading of the Ramban that that's the case. The Zohar definitely believes in it, and the Zohar is if not in some of its, at least in much, in its spirit and the tone of its content and its message represents the Kabbalistic tradition that predated its publication. Let's put it that way. It's not like the Zohar came out of nowhere. It definitely reflects the tradition of Kabbalah that existed. So the tradition of Kabbalah was that there is such a thing as Gilgulei Nefashot or Gilgulei Neshamot. Now the Abarbanel actually takes up this issue, and the Abarbanel is an interesting character because he goes through all the objections to Gilgul and concludes he defends it. He defends Gilgul, and he defends it absolutely. The Abarbanel defends it. He comes out on the side of Gilgul. The Ramchal comes as a Kabbalist, also kind of a hybrid, similar to the Abarbanel, who was fully conversant and familiar with both the rationalist schools of thought and with the Kabbalistic schools of thought. Also believed in Gilgul.
With both schools of thought?
The Ramchal, the Abarbanel. These are people who had a foot in both worlds. You have somebody like the Vilna Gaon. Also, is a person who was pretty. I mean, he was more of a Mikubal probably, but was somebody who was aware of both sides of the issue. So for these individuals, it was they sided with the idea of Gilgul. So for me to come and tell you what I personally think would be irrelevant. There's obviously far greater chachamim on both sides of the issue than anybody sitting in the room now, but. Just to put in context, what is the basic argument about Gilgul? To put it in its, what is the argument? So there's a very, very basic machloket between Kabbalah and non-Kabbalah about the nature of the soul, and a lot of the differences between Kabbalah and what's called rationalism, even though I object to that term, because in my opinion Mekubalim are also rational. They're just operating within a different system of thought. They're not irrational. It's not like Mekubalim say we don't believe in rationality and logic, and people who are not Mekubalim say we believe in rationality and logic. It's not how it works. The Ramban is very thoroughly logical. So is the Ramchal. He wrote books on logic. I mean, he obviously was logical. There's no question. So it's a davar pashut. The Abarbanel certainly studied logic. So there's no question that these were all very logical people. So the calling Mekubalim non-rationalist is not fair. They are rational. They are logical. If a person's operating within a certain set of premises. Let's say a person believes in psychoanalytic psychology, Freudian psychology, and another person believes in behavioral psychology. They're both very rational and logical within their framework. One accepts a certain set of premises about how the mind works. One accepts another one. Once they accept that, that's their point of departure. But within that framework, they're very logical. Okay, so that's the same thing. The Mikubalim are accepting different premises, and one of the big issues between Mikubalim and the non-Mikubalim is the issue of what is the nature of the soul. Is the soul a substance that exists and is housed in the body? Okay, but actually has its own independent existence? Or is the soul something which is a potential within you when you're born, and that you actualize? And that's a big difference in how you understand the soul, because if you understand the soul as when you're born, there's a certain innate potential in you that you can actualize, and that's your soul. You are the one who essentially develops and creates your soul out of the potential that existed. So if you look at it that way, then Gilgul doesn't make it really work, because Gilgul is that the soul is going to now be transplanted to another personality in another body, and that wouldn't work. But if you understand the soul as kind of like a separate entity, that when you're born, Hashem places within you this certain entity, almost for safekeeping, as it were, and you are supposed to work on it and fix it and repair it. And if you failed, so then that entity, you were just a vehicle for that. So now that entity is going to move to somebody else who's going to fix it and tinker with it until it's ready to reach its final destination, so to speak. Okay, that's the way the Mekubalim understand the soul. And that explains a lot of what they believe, for example, about also Yemot HaMashiach, that the Ramban and the Mekubalim believe that after Techiyat HaMetim, people are going to live forever. Why? Because the soul will live in the body forever. Because the ideal state of the soul is to be within the body. Okay, that's the way that they view it. As opposed to the Rambam and his school, who believe that your soul emerges out of your physical nature, you actualize it from the potential that exists within you, and it's uniquely yours. It can't be transferred to anybody else. It's uniquely yours. And if you don't actualize it, then you know what happens? There's nothing to transfer.
They say
it's like I could transfer to you everything in my bank account because it's zero.
They say that
right? There's nothing in there. If there's nothing in there, then there's nothing to transfer. Whereas the Mekubalim say you are born already with a soul, a diamond inside you. Okay? And you have to polish the diamond to the best of your ability. And if you fail, we pass it to the next guy to polish it. As opposed to the Rambam, it says, no, it emerges from you. It's an emergent process, the soul. You're not born with a ready-made soul. So it doesn't make any sense to transfer a nothing. Okay, either you're able to actualize it or not. It's unique to you. So this difference is a difference that actually manifests itself in many different areas of difference between the Kabbalah and the non-Kabbalah. This difference about the nature of the soul. Is the soul a naturalistic thing that emerges from your learning and your process of development? It actualizes within you. It's in potentia when you're born. It's not there actually. It's in potentia only. Or is it something supernatural that is deposited in you, which is the way most people think about it also, and that therefore isn't really you? You are responsible for. It's the soul you were given to work on, but if you don't manage to do anything with it, it could be transferred to some other person who now gets the job of doing it. Okay? Yes?
Is there a difference? What is the difference between the soul and the mind?
Well, that's it. That's a good question and complicated.
Everything you just described is the way we talk about the mind, or at least the conscious mind.
Right.
It's sort of that.
Right. So.
Is it this dualistic thing where it's not the brain and it's something non-physical and spiritual, or is it something that emerges from the properties of the brain? Is it something natural? It's like
right.
Like the way you talk is the way people talk about the brain.
Right.
And the mind.
So I would say the difference, but it's not there's a pure dualism like a Cartesian dualism in Kabbalah. Right. Because there's an idea that there's a totally separate spiritual entity that is in the person when they're born, like the way that like a Cartesian type of view. But the non-Kabbalists take a more Aristotelian view, which is that it's something which is an emergent property of the physical. It is metaphysical ultimately, but only if you actualize it to be. So that's why Rambam, this explains another difference between, let's say, the Rambam and the Mekubalim. That the Rambam says if you don't actualize your soul, there's no Gehinnom. There's just nothing. There's just zero. There's nothing there to work with to punish. That's just dirt. There's just organic matter that is now going to decay. That's it. Whereas opposed to the Kabbalah can have an idea that there's Gehinnom, that there's some purification process that can happen to the soul, even if you didn't do anything with it. In other words, even if it was a soul that wasn't properly worked on. So that that's much more of a Cartesian view than the Rambam's view, which is that it's an emergent thing, and if it never emerges, it becomes something metaphysical. But it starts with it emerges from a potentia that is innate in the physical, innate in the human soul. The human soul is not the same as the mind. The human soul is something other than the mind, but the human soul only has a potentia. It has the potential to become metaphysical. It's not automatically metaphysical. It has to get to that point by the person connecting to Hashem through the use of their mind and the tools, spiritual tools that they have.
Did they say, is it true that the Moshiach ben Yosef is really Moshiach ben David or something? You heard about this?
That's impossible because they're two different people.
No. When Moshiach ben Yosef he died, and then Moshiach ben.
Oh, you mean the Gilgula? I'm not a good go-to person for Kabbalah. I don't know all the Kabbalistic agadot. I don't know. Yes.
Nowadays, is there a chiyuv to wear a hair covering? I'm reading.
Men, women. What are you talking about? For men? It's midat chasidut. Okay, which means it's a nice, praiseworthy practice to cover the head, which is supposed to remind the person of the Shekhinah. We actually just talked about last night in the Shulchan Aruch class. It's not a hard and fast halakha. The only time that the halakha brings it down as a requirement is when you're saying Hashem's name in tefillah. There it's appropriate, even halachically, to wear a kippah. But me'ikar adin, it's not required. It's midat chasidut. The Gemara says that it was something that the pious people did, that they wouldn't walk 4 amot without their heads covered, but it's talking about the great tzaddikim. Nowadays, because it's become such a ubiquitous, common practice, so many of the contemporary poskim say, listen, you're making a political statement if you don't do it. Right? You're making a political statement now because you're saying I'm not part of the religious camp. I'm part of the secular because I'm not wearing kippah. So that's a meta halachic concern. We can't really say your political affiliations don't create a halachic obligation on you to wear a kippah. So the basic answer is there a halachic obligation to wear a kippah? No, we can't say that. Is there a midat chasidut to wear a kippah? Yes, it instills piety in the person. Are there political benefits in wearing a kippah because it demonstrates your affiliation with a certain in crowd and shows your respect for it and your connection with it, and therefore someone who sees you without a kippah might say, oh, that person's not very religious because they don't wear a kippah, and then you're going to be in a way sending a message you don't mean to send? Yes, but that doesn't mean that it's halachically prohibited. That just means that that's the reality of the message that you're going to send. You understand what I'm saying? So, if you don't care about that, that may or may not be a wise decision on your part, but that's the halakha. Somebody can't make up a halakha that now requires you to wear a kippah because you have to be concerned about the message that you're sending about your beliefs about Hashem. That's up to you. It's like if a person goes to a black hat yeshiva and they decide not to wear a black hat, they're sending a message that they don't affiliate with they don't identify with the hashkafa of the yeshiva. Is somebody going to say they're violating a halakha? No, but they're making a statement, let's say. And that statement is made at their own risk. That's your own choice. It's a personal choice. Do I recommend wearing a kippah? Of course. I wear one. Okay? I think we're over time. I'm going to get in trouble.